Sunday, December 9th, 2018. Hello and good morning to Harold, Smoky Simon.
Nice to see you and Uri.
Before your Aliyah story and your Machal story and Wolf Independence, I want to ask you a little bit about your roots, your origin, your parents. Where exactly did you grow up in South Africa?
I really grew up in a small town by the name of Winburg. And after matriculating, that's when I went to university. I worked and studied at the same time. I served what we call articles of clerkship with a firm of accountants and auditors. And I finished with 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Commerce and a Chartered Accountant. And then really what happened was when I wrote my last examination, I put down my pen and I joined the South African Air Force in January 1941.
At the same day you graduated? You finished your last exam?
Exactly. I put down my pen because we did not have conscription in South Africa. It was all voluntary who entered the army because of the political divide between the English and the Afrikaans part of the population. So I was trained as a navigator bombardier. I served for 5 years in the Air Force, from January 41 to the end of 1945. After the war, like all servicemen, I was trying to rehabilitate myself. And then, as I said, when we saw the war clouds gathering over Palestine, we changed course and came over as machanikim. We arrived in Palestine on the 9th of May 1948. We signed on for the Air Force on the 10th of May. And on the 14th of May, Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel. And I had a rather unique experience on that day. The army gave an order to the Air Force to do a reconnaissance over Jordan, because Jordan was the first Arab country to attack Israel. They actually attacked on the 14th of May. And it was a rather unique experience. The pilot was Boris Senior, who was a very well-known mechanic. I was the navigator, and we had an Israeli aerial photographer. Shmulik, exactly. And so what was unique about it, that when we took off from Sde Dov on the flight, we left, it was still Palestine. But when we came back from the flight, it was already Israel, because the State of Israel was declared by Ben-Gurion at that very time on Friday, the 14th of May.
It was your first flight, I guess.
And that was the first operational flight of Hail-Avir.
You just arrived, so it was your first flight also.
Yeah, it was my first flight and the first flight of the Air Force. The first operational flight of the Air Force.
how did you physically, your wife and yourself, how did you get here? By boat, by plane?
No,
From South Africa?
we came by plane. It was, the company was called Pan-African Charter, and it was really owned by 3 Jewish gentlemen in South Africa. It was quite a long trip because there were hold-ups in the Sudan and so forth across Africa, and we arrived in Cyprus. And before leaving Cyprus, the pilot said, you know, I can't fly to Palestine. They're fighting at Lydda Airport, and I cannot risk my passengers and my airplane. I was, as it were, the leader of our group at the time, and I said, look, but we've got a contract. You've got to get us to Palestine. So they arranged with a Cypriot airline who said, we will take you only to Haifa. We said, that's fine. Get us to Haifa. And that's where we landed. And at the time, the British were evacuating because the mandate was due to end at midnight of the 14th and 15th of May. The airfield at Haifa was swarming with British military, police and so forth, because bear in mind, there were over 80,000 British troops in Palestine.
And they didn't finish their evacuation at the 14th of May. They stayed for
that's also correct. Yeah. And we had some secret documents which my wife put in her underwear for Bengurion. We didn't know the contents, of course, but we were worried in case the British police interrogated us and maybe searched us, but everything passed off b'shekhet. And so we signed up for service with Hail-Avir on the 10th of May. And as I said, on the 14th of May, that was my first flight and the first flight of the Air Force.
What was the attitude in your home towards Zionism and Eretz Israel?
Yeah. Now, the South African Jewish community was very much Zionist orientated. And when it seemed that a war was inevitable, the South African Zionist Federation did a wonderful job. They got in touch with the ex-servicemen and they said, guys, we've got to support Israel. And you know, it wasn't very easy because the ex-servicemen from World War II were really just beginning to establish themselves.
Starting life.
That's right. You know, I had 5 years in the Air Force, and then you got to get back to a normal routine, which is not so easy. But the South African Zionist Federation, as I said, they had such a spirited attitude. We've got to help the Jews in Palestine. War is inevitable. And the guys rallied. Interestingly enough, there were Sahakol 4,800 Mahomeks who came from 59 countries. And South Africa, which had a relatively small community, about 120,000 souls, men, women and children, but we had 832 mechanics from South Africa, and in fact it was the largest single contribution of the different Jewish communities. America had a little less than that. Of course, they had some men of tremendous stature who came through, which we can talk about presently.
Why did you join the flight course during World War II? Who asked you to do that?
An interesting question. The Nazis in Germany really started in the 1930s, in the early 30s. And then Hitler, of course, rose to power. And a number of German Jewish refugees came to South Africa to get out of Germany. And in the course of whilst I was studying and my work, I met quite a number of these German Jews who came to South Africa. And when I heard the stories of the persecution of the Jews in Germany and Kristallnacht in 1938, I developed a tremendous hostility to the Germans. And so when World War II broke out, as a matter of fact, I even volunteered in 1940. But the government in South Africa took an interesting decision. They said that no student in his final year would be permitted to join up. So that's why I said the moment I finished writing my last exam, I went into the Air Force. And it was really, I had built up such an hostility to the Germans and to the Nazis and what was happening, that what really motivated me to serve in the Air Force.
Did you choose to become a navigator? Didn't you prefer to be a combat pilot?
Yeah, I really had hoped to be a combat pilot. I didn't make the grade for the pilot's course, and I immediately went on to the navigator's course, and I got the training as a what we call a navigated bombardier, and I served in that role in the Air Force. I had in the South African Air Force. I had a short spell with the Royal Air Force. What happened was, in the Western Desert, in the fight against Rommel, the Desert Fox, as we call him, the point that I really want to make there is that now the navigators, of course, they do a wonderful job in the F-16s and so on. But in our day, we really had what we call a bomb sight. And also when we used to fly at night, we used to do astronavigation with the stars and so forth.
Classic navigation.
Yeah. We called it astronavigation at night. And so I really spent my flying career first in Bomber Command and then in Coastal Command. In Coastal Command, it was hunting the German U-boats, their submarines, escorting our convoys of troops being transferred all over the place, doing naval reconnaissance. And so I had my first operation in Bomber Command and my second operation in Coastal Command.
What kind of warplanes were you using?
In Bomber Command, we flew light bombers. There were Bostons and Baltimores.
American?
Yeah, American. And in Coastal Command, we flew the Catalinas, which were American, and the Sunderland, which was a very big plane, which was British.
Did the South African aircrew members knew each other before they joined the Israeli Air Force? People like Boris Senior, Eddie Cohen, Sid Kentridge, Hugo Alperstein, and others. Did they knew each other before?
We
were
knew,
part of a group.
You know, the South African Jews who served in the Air Force, you know, it was, bear in mind that the war was really over a period of 6 years, from September 39 to the end of 45. Now, Sid Cohen, for example, whom I knew, he had already started serving. It was his first year at medical school. So he left medical school and he then started fighting in Abyssinia against the Italians in 1940. We knew, now you see, Sid, for example, was in fighter command in the South African Air Force. I was in bomber command. You met some of these guys, for example, when we were on a day's Hoffish in Cairo. And it so happened that actually guys who were in fighter squadrons used to give us cover when we were on bombing missions. But we really didn't know the guys at that time. You know, it was just one squadron supporting a bomber squadron. But after the war, there were a number of get-togethers of guys who had served. And in the South African Zionist Federation, there was a chap by the name of Simon Weinstein. I don't know whether you heard that name. This guy was absolutely fantastic towards recruiting ex-servicemen to come over to Israel. Simon, he served in World War II. He was, he wasn't really a qualified rabbi, but he served as a rabbi in the Western Desert. And then we started meeting each other and getting together. And then, you know, just to take a step forward, are you possibly aware that a guy by the name of Cecil Margot, the name is familiar to you? Yeah. Cecil was a very senior officer in the South African Air Force, and a terrific guy, a bomber pilot, and a fellow with tremendous courage. Ben-Gurion actually offered him command of the Air Force. And Cecil visited the squadrons and headquarters and so forth. And I took him to the airport when he left Israel. and he declined Ben Gurion's offer. And I said to him, Cecil, why did you decline?
Why didn't you take it?
Yeah. Why didn't you take it? By the way, he was a very successful barrister, a lawyer. He was a very brilliant guy as well, and a fellow with tremendous charisma. And he was doing very well in his professional practice in Johannesburg. And he said to me, you know, I've interviewed so many people, not only Air Force people, but politicians. And he says, I came to the conclusion that the political impact in Israel was so great that I would not have the independence that I needed to really shape the Air Force.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And he left.
And he left.
Wow.
He didn't cut off his ties, you know, because we were training pilots in South Africa as well, and Cecil was very much interested in their progress and so on and so forth. And he felt that the Politician would not give him the independence that he really needed. They want to take some of their decisions, you know.